Mick's hands were still shaking when he set the leash on the counter. "He was fine," he said. "Then I got the broom out. After that, he was aggressive out of nowhere." He signed the return form quickly. Lorna didn't ask for more. She already had 2 other words in the file: destructive and can't be left alone. 3 homes in 11 days, 3 returns. Tully was still wearing the collar Mick had bought him, dark green and barely worn in. Lorna walked him back herself, past the kennels and the low sound of dogs settling for the evening. The moment they turned toward his gate, Tully came apart in what looked like joy. He surged against the leash, spun, and threw his paws up before she'd even opened it. His tail cracked against the wall behind him, hard and fast, over and over. It didn't stop when she crouched down. It didn't stop when she let him lick her hand raw. "Hey," she said. "I know." He didn't slow down or exhale. He kept pressing his whole weight into her knees. It looked exactly like joy. "He remembers me," she said, mostly to herself. But a full minute passed with Lorna still right there. His panting didn't ease, his body didn't loosen, and the tail kept striking the wall. That was when she noticed the marks. Small dark stains had dried into the concrete at exactly that height. Some were old, a few were too fresh to have dried all the way. Tully was missing his left eye, and under the rough tan coat, he was wagging harder than any dog she'd sent home in months. With 3 return stamps behind her and blood on the wall, Lorna wondered if she had ever understood Tully at all. The first couple to take him had walked past 6 quieter dogs to reach his kennel. Tully threw himself at the gate the second he saw them. "He chose us," the woman said. "He picks his person fast," Lorna told them, and she meant it. At home, he stayed close for the first hour, underfoot and leaning into every hand. Then they left for groceries. 20 minutes, maybe less. They came back to splinters on the hardwood, gouges around the doorframe, and saliva smeared along the bottom edge where he'd worked at it with his teeth. Tully was already panting before the key turned. They weren't angry when they returned him, just overwhelmed. Lorna decided privately that they'd moved too fast, that they had left him alone before he'd had time to adjust. She still believed that when she filed the report. Joan lived alone, and the first few hours felt like exactly what she wanted. Tully stood whenever she stood and followed her from room to room. Then she closed the bathroom door just to shower. He scratched hard enough to leave marks and whined until she came back out. That night, every shift of the mattress brought his head back up. Joan returned him the next morning, tired and a little embarrassed. "Can't be left alone," she wrote. She didn't mention that she'd never actually left him alone longer than a shower. This time, Lorna didn't file the report away as quickly. Later that day, she caught herself about to tell another visitor that Tully picked his person fast. She stopped before finishing the sentence. Mick's house had gone quietest of the 3. There was no damage and less pacing, and for a while he thought the others had simply met Tully on a bad day. Then came laundry day. The broom came out of the closet, its worn handle wrapped in black tape and the bristles scraping across the floor. Tully stopped mid-stride and turned his head until his right eye could track it. His shoulders went rigid. He backed up half a step, pinned his ears, and gave a low growl. Mick kept moving toward him, slow and steady, certain that one more calm step would prove there was nothing to fear. Then he raised the handle to sweep under the counter. Tully lunged toward the bristles. Mick dropped the broom and backed into the hallway, his hands already shaking. "Aggressive without warning," his report said. At this point, would you have called Tully aggressive too? Tell me what you would have thought. 3 returns, 3 different labels. Each time, Tully came back to the same kennel in a different collar. That evening, Lorna laid the reports side by side. Bad luck and rushed adopters no longer seemed to explain them. Something underneath all 3 was starting to look connected.
Yes, you are.
Lorna started watching before she let herself approach. Tully's tail was moving, but the rest of him told a more complicated story. His right pupil was wide and dark, and his breathing came fast and shallow. Even after several minutes, the panting didn't ease. His head kept turning the same way, angling his good eye toward whatever moved nearby. Then a maintenance worker passed with a supply cart. Tully gave him almost the same greeting he'd given Lorna, the same lunge against the gate, the same frantic tail. If a stranger got that greeting too, then maybe it had never been about one special person. Lorna tried something small. She stepped back down the corridor and stopped without leaving. Tully didn't settle. If anything, he pawed harder, whined higher, and watched the space where she'd been standing. Even with Lorna still nearby, the tension didn't ease. She brought the 3 reports to Inns, who read them slowly without offering comfort or agreement. "What happened right before each one?" she asked. Lorna walked her through it, the errand, the closed bathroom door, and the broom coming out of the closet. Inns tapped the 3rd report. "He doesn't settle when people arrive," she said. "He stays tense the whole time they're there." It wasn't a full answer. It made the question harder. That evening, Lorna searched an older cabinet for anything that predated Tully's intake photos. She found a thin folder that hadn't been opened in over a year. It mentioned a private residence, a deceased owner, the condition of his left eye, and long-handled equipment used during his removal from the home. Lorna opened it. Harold Penn had lived alone with Tully for years in a quiet house with a fixed routine and few visitors. There was little in the file suggesting Tully had regularly experienced someone leaving and coming back. Then Harold died suddenly. Tully stayed inside until someone finally came. By then, his left eye was already badly injured, too damaged to save. During his removal, he reacted defensively when long-handled equipment was used to keep distance from him. The file didn't say how the eye had been hurt. Lorna read that part twice, then let the uncertainty remain. What the file did make clear was how much Tully had lost at once, his only person, his routine, and one eye. Lorna and Inns went back over Mick's account, this time slowing the sequence down. The broom had entered from Tully's blind side. He turned his head to bring it into view, backed away half a step, and went rigid. His ears pinned back before the growl came. Several signals had happened before the lunge. The growl wasn't the first warning, Inns said. It was the first one Mick understood. Lorna sat with that. Tully hadn't been unpredictable. People had been giving different names to behaviors they hadn't understood yet. Destructive, can't be left alone. Aggressive, without warning. And then there was the phrase Lorna herself had kept using, "He picks his person fast." Once they looked at what happened around each behavior, those labels stopped explaining very much. The frantic greeting at the gate belonged to a broader pattern of following, watching, difficulty settling, and distress around distance and departure. The broom was different. It had entered from his blind side, and before Tully lunged, he had tried to track it, backed away, stiffened, and growled. The situations were different, but the context mattered in both. In each case, Tully had been giving information before anyone knew how to read it. He wasn't choosing people, Lorna said quietly. He was trying not to lose them. If you're seeing Tully differently now, leave a like. Then she thought about the sentence she'd been saying instead. He picks his person fast. It had sounded like praise. It had felt helpful, like an eager dog meeting an eager family. She hadn't realized how much distress she had been reading as simple affection, or how that interpretation had helped move Tully a little faster toward homes that weren't prepared for what he actually needed. That week, Inns rewrote his file. It didn't call Tully safe, but it no longer flattened him into a single label. The new assessment described what the shelter had actually observed: separation-related distress, kennel over-arousal, increased startle risk on his blind side, and a defensive response to long objects moving into that space. And this time, the description changed to decision. Walk-in placement was suspended. Tully would not simply be sent into another ordinary adoption. The next step would be a structured foster with someone prepared to work with the behaviors already in front of them. Nothing about the new file made Tully less complicated. It simply described him more accurately. And for the first time, that description was changing what happened to him next. With Tully, the misunderstanding had begun long before the broom. It began when everyone noticed the wagging tail and stopped reading the rest of him. If you want to understand your own dog's signals more clearly, there's a resource linked in the description. But one question remained. Could Tully learn that someone leaving did not mean losing them for good? Mavis's house ran on the same small routine every day, and that, more than anything else, was the point. Tully still rose whenever she crossed a room. He followed her to doorways and waited there, his head angled so his right eye stayed on her. During the first week, even a minute outside left him rigid near the door, his weight forward and his body unable to settle until she came back. Progress came in pieces too small to call a breakthrough. One afternoon, Mavis walked into the kitchen. Tully watched her go, but this time, he stayed where he was. A few days later, she stepped outside to check the mail. When she came back, Tully was waiting near the door. He'd been tense, but the frame was untouched. After a longer absence, he still needed several minutes to settle when she returned. That was new too. The reaction still came, but now, eventually, it could end. Some nights later, a cabinet closed somewhere in the house. Another time, a footstep sounded in the next room. Tully didn't lift his head. Little by little, a closed door stopped carrying the same meaning it once had. One afternoon, he crossed the room on his own and lay down closer to Mavis's chair than he ever had before. Mavis felt the urge to speak, maybe to reach down and praise him. She didn't. She kept reading and left her hand where it was. The moment remained his. When Lorna visited weeks later, she did something she wouldn't have done a month earlier. She didn't crouch down by the gate or call his name. She simply let herself in, sat down, and waited to see what Tully would do with the space she left him. He lifted his head, and his tail moved once, then again. Tully stood, but he didn't rush across the room. He approached slowly and lay down where he could see both women at once. There was no frantic surge and no body thrown against a barrier. Lorna didn't need to tell herself that he remembered her. A little later, she stood to leave. The door closed behind her. Tully lifted his head and watched it with his right eye. For a few seconds, he stayed still and listened. Mavis didn't call him. She didn't touch him or fill the silence. Tully let out a long breath and lowered his head back onto the rug. Everyone had believed trust was the way Tully greeted a person. It wasn't. Trust was the first time someone left, and Tully was able to stay.